I'm going to go get my Bible.
All right. We want to welcome you to Grace Baptist Church's Saturday Sunday School. We have been doing this since coronavirus hit. Normally we meet at 9:30 on Sunday, but during this season of time, until things settle down, we meet on Zoom at 10 o'clock. And we're glad that you are here. We have been in the book of Isaiah, and today we jump ahead into Isaiah 23. And I put a subtitle down there, and I really like this subtitle, and I thought it really was important because it says this: God controls the rise and fall of nations and powers. That's an important element to today because we're going to be getting into some prophecy about what happens to nations when God brings judgment on their sin. Now, in front of you is a map, and I want you to look up there where it's toward the top where it says Phoenicia. The city called Tyre is heavily involved in today's lesson. And God has some things he's going to say about Tyre through Isaiah in chapter 23. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But since we're just now getting started, we have a number of things that are facing us. And so when I prayed, I said, God, what's the deal for today? Because when I looked at the beginning and I was thinking the last 2 weeks were really easy. There were things, subjects and all that, but this week's a little different. And I said, Lord, what is the relevance for it? Well, it didn't take too long to figure that out because we're in the season of 2020 elections. In about a month, right? We're going to be seeing an election. We also have on the international stage things that are taking place. Who's the dominant nation? Is it the United States? Is it China? Quite a bit. What about Russia? What about North Korea and many other nations? And you wonder what would happen in time. So this is one of those times, like, for example, the election. We ought to be praying like it all depends on God. But we ought to be voting like it all depends on us, right? In fact, there's groups of people that are meeting in Washington and doing emphasis and praying for the nation. So I hope that you will take some time today and throughout the week to pray for the nation and over the course of the next month and ask God's leadership, because he's the one who controls the rise and fall of nations, politicians. He allows all of that. Do you believe that? Mm-hmm. But yes. At the same time, are we prone to get uptight about all that stuff? I am. I'm just going to tell you, I do. And I have this. So this is a good lesson for me today to remind me of the importance of not getting too uptight. Now, last week we were in chapter 7, and I want to go ahead and show you what takes place in the book of Isaiah from last Saturday when we met all the way to today. Now, you look at there's a lot of things there, isn't there? For example, the last half of chapter 7, the trials coming Judah. Chapter 8, Damascus and Samaria. Samaria's fallen, a believing remnant. Chapter 9, the birth of the Prince of Peace and God's anger with Israel's arrogance. Chapter 10 gets into Assyria. Chapter 11, a righteous reign. Chapter 12, Thanksgiving. Chapter 13, Babylon prophecies, the day of the Lord. That's interesting. Chapter 14, Israel's taunt. Assyria, Philistia. Then you get to Moab in 2 different chapters. Damascus prophecy, Ethiopia, Egypt. So all of these countries, back to Babylon again, and then chapter 22, the Valley of Vision. So God, it may be true that Israel was the centerpiece of what God was doing in the world with the coming of the Messiah one day. And one day we will be joining the Messiah. He will be the groom and we will be the bride of Christ. But God takes seriously, he watches over what takes place in nations all around the world. And just like in Isaiah's day, he had something to say about the nation. So, like, for example, in chapters 13 through 23, they're known as oracles against the nation, where God is sovereign over them. And again, this is relevant to us because we have something called the United Nations. Israel, China, all the Arabs. But he alone allows them to have the power that they do for a season of time. But at the same time, even though he's sovereign over them, they have a responsibility too, and he will hold them accountable for their conduct because he measures their conduct against his own holiness. So they're not going to get away with rejecting him. They're not going to get away with injustice, all of that. Now, that's a lot in a short bit, isn't it? Well, we're going to be jumping into several different places. Now, as an introduction also, I want to ask you this question. Does the issues of injustice, do they loom large over us, justice versus injustice? If you're not sure about that, turn on your TV. All you see is these issues. You know, how was the president treated? How was, some of the people who were killed? Riots and protests in the streets. All of these things all center around the words justice and injustice. And we sometimes think God is slow. They say that sometimes in America, the wheels of justice turn slow. Well, for a lot of the people back then, it turned way slower than they ever felt good about, sometimes over 100 years. But God is patient. And so he is going to work. And one of the things he's going to point out, and this is the first thing we're going to be looking at, is this: God is just. So let's move to the first section. And let me read this to you. It says, who has planned this against Tyre? That's that city that we looked at earlier on the map. The bestower of crowns, whose merchants were princes, whose traders were the honored of the earth. The Lord of hosts has planned it, to defile the pride of all beauty, to despise all the honored of the sea. Overflow your land like the Nile, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no more restraint. Now notice this phrase: he has stretched out his hand over the sea. He has made the kingdoms tremble. The Lord has given a command concerning Canaan to demolish its strongholds. He has said, you shall exalt no more, O crushed daughter of Sidon. Arise, pass over to Cyprus. Even there you will find no rest. Now, does anybody have an idea what that picture is in the corner?
Well, I do, but see if somebody else does.
All right. Anybody recognize it other than Ernie? All right. Ernie.
Gibraltar? The Rock of Gibraltar?
No, not quite.
Oh, wait a minute. What is that?
All right. Ernie, tell us.
Well, this happened in the 320s BC.
Mm-hmm.
Alexander finally destroyed Tyre. Others had attacked, and Tyre was on the mainland, but there was an island off the mainland. And when Alexander attacked, he finally drove them off the mainland, and they went over to the island. And the island is about 1,500 yards off the coast. And Alexander built this area that you see there, and then he also used those tall towers he built to erect and chunk rocks over at them. He finally finally captured them, and it made him so mad that they were so hard to defeat that he wound up destroying over half the people that were left in Tyre.
That is an excellent summary. And by the way, those towers were made with fireproofing because they would a lot of times shoot flaming arrows at them. Well, I'll get back to that in just a minute. But what you see that's being built is what they call a causeway. So yes. Here we go, Tyre. So it's a Phoenician city or seaport in the Mediterranean, 35 miles north of Mount Carmel and 28 miles west of Mount Hermon. Now remember, Tyre supplied Solomon the lumber, the cedars of Tyre, to build his temple. So at one point there was a pretty strong connection between the two, and I think there'd probably be evidence that Tyre was greatly affected by David and Solomon in terms of spiritual influence. But over time, just like it is in our country, spiritual influence can be waning. Now he gives several descriptions of them. Like, for example, the first description is called the bestower of crowns. So that probably refers to international prestige. Tyre had lots of prestige. It was the place. Then here's a second description, whose merchants are princes, meaning nations would send royal sons to actually do trading there. So they were actually, the merchants themselves and the people who came to do business were treated as royalty. Here's another description. Traders were the honored of the earth, meaning they were the renowned of the earth, the merchant class. In other words, they would be considered as the elites. You know how it is, we have the elites of our country. See, the elites of our country seem to escape justice, don't they? A lot. They can just pay people off. And that's the way it's been for thousands of years. And unfortunately, it happens here. Now, in our country, we're supposed to be, we say this phrase that nobody is beneath the law. Remember that? We use that. That means everybody should have justice equally shared out to them. But in practice, does that happen? Unfortunately, it doesn't. We have elites, and they were the merchants then were the elites. So notice what it says in verse 9, the Lord of hosts has planned it, meaning Tyre, you may have planned to be an empire for a long time, but the Lord has got different plans. He's going to defile the pride of all beauty. So Tyre supplied all of its foolishness and all of the arrogance stemming from the city's glory. And Tyre itself had been under siege 5 times, and they escaped it until, and Ernie, you nailed it, till about 332 BC. And the last one to besiege it was Alexander the Great, and he leveled the city, which was prophesied in Ezekiel 26. And then, let's see, it says, the Lord has planned it to defile the pride of people, to despise all the honored of the earth. Meaning this, all of these people who were called elites will be brought down to their knees. Have you ever seen people who were elites brought down to their knees? You ever seen that before? Can you name one?
Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon, okay. Very true.
Was it Epstein that hung himself in jail that had been visited by presidents and by, you know?
He would have been considered an elite. What about, let's see, the guy in Egypt? Or they caught him in a hole. It's not Egypt.
Hussein.
Saddam
Hussein.
No, it's not Saddam Hussein.
Bin Laden.
Although
Bin Laden.
Well, he was caught that way too. Anyway, I forgot that name of it. But here's the point. Elites, even those who talk loudly, they have military power, they have prestige, they can all be brought to their knees. And when that happens, it'll be by the Lord himself. Verse 10, overflow your land like the Nile. Now, this can refer to a river going over its banks, or figuratively, it can refer to an influx of refugees or even an invading army. And I think that's what is the meaning here, that there's going to be an invading army that you're not going to be able to stop. So there is no more restraint. He has stretched out his hand over the sea. He has made the kingdoms tremble. Now that verse 11 is kind of interesting. He said he stretched his hand out over the sea. Can you remember another time that God stretched out his hand over the sea through somebody? Who was it?
The children of Israel going over the Red Sea.
That's right. And they walked across on dry land. And this, when I read this, and I'm not the first person to say this, it makes me wonder if this is an allusion back to that picture. Remember, that they thought that, the Egyptians thought that the Red Sea blocked the Israelites from going through, and yet they walked through on dry land. Well, when it was time for Tyre to be destroyed, what did Alexander walk across? Dry land. And so, yeah, you could say, Alexander can say, I built this causeway. No, the Lord allowed you to do that. That's what the meaning is here. I find that kind of interesting. So God is going to bring judgment on those thinking that the sea would protect them, or in the Egyptians' case, the sea would aid them. He has made the kingdoms tremble, literally. And Rahab uses a kind of description like this in Joshua 2, 8 through 11. And then it says, the Lord, he has stretched out hand, he's made the kingdoms tremble. The Lord has given a command concerning Canaan to demolish its strongholds. So this was a territory which included both Tyre and Sidon, the two pictures or the two cities I pointed out to you at the very beginning. And this actually could also be a reference back and a picture of, just like the Israelites took the promised land, they would be taken at this, in a similar fashion. And then finally, the last verse says, you shall exalt no more, O crushed daughter of Sidon. Arise, pass over to Cyprus. Even there you will find no rest. Now, one of the things that they did in Tyre after they evacuated to the island, they actually evacuated more people to different places because they wanted to get women and children out of there. And yet they would find no rest because Alexander had a vast empire. He was amazing in what he did, how much he conquered in a short amount of time. So here is a city once noted for its freshness and revelry, became, using this picture right there, like a used up old woman trying to piece together what was left. And so God would use people to destroy them. Now, again, they were besieged 5 times. It was only in 332 that they were finally destroyed. So he said, you will pass over to Cyprus, but no rest, which is about 150 miles northwest of Sidon. And their citizens would try to escape. They maybe the invading army, but really they were trying to escape God's judgment, and this effort would fail. All right. This involves a lot of prophecy, a lot of understanding what was going on back then. And so does anybody have anything they want to add to it before we move on? All right.
Jimmy?
Yes.
What year are we talking about that these prophecies are being made? Isaiah.
Well, the final one is 332, but
Okay.
there would be other ones. Go ahead, Ernie.
Well, he's making these prophecies about 700 plus or minus 20 years. So he's making it 400 years before this happened. And then, Ezekiel was making his during the captivity, which would have been another 200 or 300 years before it happened. So it took a long time before Alexander got there. But as Jimmy pointed out, there were numerous others. I believe that even Babylon would have attacked the place. Assyria, probably Tiglath-Pileser and Sennacherib. He came down during Hezekiah's time, and he had already captured the nation of Israel had already been captured a few years before that by another Assyrian emperor. So they probably were attacked those times, but they weren't totally destroyed during those times, during those 5 times.
Excellent.
Thank
All
you.
right. Let's move on to the next section. Say again.
Jimmy. So
Yes.
is Tyre, what country would Tyre be in today?
I know it was Phoenicia back then.
Is this up like in Lebanon or Syria, or is this Israel?
I think it would be Lebanon.
Lebanon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I told Ernie before, I said, buddy, you know history and stuff better than I do, so please jump in whenever you can. And
one of the things, like you said, it was known as Phoenicia at that particular time. And you have probably heard of the Phoenician sailors. Mm-hmm. It was one of the powerhouses in the shipping industry of that time. Even though they weren't a strong naval type shipping deal, they were a commercial shipping place. And when we see it talked about Tyre here, they were going all the way over to Spain with their ships, and they were bringing goods. They were the merchants of the world at that time, as in Britain became that way later on, and I guess even the Greek sailors, merchants were known. 30 or 40 years ago, you'd hear about Onassis, the guy that what's her name, married. That he was a shipping magnate. Greece was known as a shipping empire also, but at this time, Phoenicia and the Phoenician sailors were going all over the world in somewhat of a peaceful merchant type thing. Now, one of the other things that I read, Alexander, in all of his conquest, one of the things that he tried to do, he conquered nations that had ships. And at one point, he, as I understand, he even had more ships than the Phoenicians had, or that Tyre had. And he was able to attack what ships they had. And that's one of the reasons they had to kind of confine themselves there on that little small island. And they had trouble getting off that island to go to Cyprus or other nations.
Mhm.
Also, the Phoenicians were known for obtaining a type of mollusk that, when crushed, would make a rich purple dye, which was used to dye the royals' clothing.
Mhm. Think about Lydia. She was a dealer of purple.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's one thing I know that none of y'all knows.
What's that?
That is, after 5 times of being besieged, that city, you know what? They were tired.
Yeah.
They were.
And well, Ernie, does that fit your humor?
Yeah, that fits. That fits.
That's what I thought when you said that. I thought that's Ernie. He would enjoy that.
It's almost as bad as telling Fritos jokes at a corn chip factory.
All right. Second one, God is active. So in other words, when we're thinking about the fact that he is sovereign and in control, know this, he is active. He says, behold the land of the Chaldeans. This is the people which was not. Assyria appointed it for desert creatures. They erected their siege towers. They stripped its palaces. They made it a ruin. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for your stronghold is destroyed. Now we move into the second segment. It says that behold the land of the Chaldeans. That is a people which was not. Assyria appointed it. So anybody know who the other name for Chaldeans is?
Babylonians.
Babylonians.
Mhm.
Yeah, they've appeared more than once. They were the great empire that destroyed Judah eventually, but here they've been taken over in an earlier time. And so it was reminding Tyre of their hopelessness against Assyria, who ravaged Babylon in 689 BC. So Assyria appointed it for a desert, that is desert creatures. So twice Babylon would be destroyed by Assyria, the worst being in 689, of course. And then it says, wail, O ships of Tarshish. So the oracle given is a metaphor, as if the ships were, in this case, alive. All right. And then they erected their siege towers. I showed you a picture of that earlier. I mean, they would not stand against it. And it says the strongholds would be destroyed. So like I said, in 332 BC, Alexander reduced it to rubble. Ernie pointed out that, yes, they destroyed, literally, he was so mad over their defense that he destroyed about half the population. Okay? And we talked a little bit about the causeway, and I'll show you a little bit more of that again and what it looks like in modern time. And really, that's all I have to mention about this. Does anybody want to, Ernie, you want to add anything about this segment?
No more. No, not now.
Okay. All right. Then that moves us then finally to the last segment. And so God is active, and also God is honored. So verses 15 through 18 says, now in that day, Tyre will be forgotten for 70 years, like the days of one king. At the end of 70 years, it will happen to Tyre as in the song of the harlot. Take your harp, walk about the city, O forgotten harlot. Pluck the strings skillfully, sing many songs, that you may be remembered. It will come about at the end of 70 years that the Lord will visit Tyre. Then she will go back to her harlot's wages and play the harlot with all the kingdoms on the face of the earth. Her gain and her harlot's wages will be set apart to the Lord. It will not be stored up or hoarded, but her gain will become sufficient food and choice attire for those who dwell in the presence of the Lord. Now, I don't know how well you can see the map, but there is a map of Tyre, the island aspect or part of it, and there is a picture of the causeway. And, you know, if I understand it, they took the broken city on the mainland and used that to develop the causeway going over to the island. Well, later on, they did that much more. And you see a picture down there at the bottom? That's a modern picture of Tyre, where they actually expanded that causeway into increased coastline. That's a lot of debris, isn't it? And a lot of things they put in there. But it's very similar to what China is doing out there in the South China Sea. They're literally building islands out there as military bases, and they're actually doing that in order to try to take over the South China Sea and claim it as theirs. Of course, America is not putting up with that. And China, you know, China reminds me of nations like Tyre. They were very arrogant. They were very bold with what they had, and they believed that they had a right, they had strength. And the way God is describing Tyre here, he's describing her like a harlot, meaning this: young, beautiful, attractive, able to attract all kinds of clientele and getting rich from it. And really the city was very much like that. It was known, and yet they would be devastated. They'll be forgotten for 70 years. Some think that means that it's obscure, but it may refer to the year between 700 and 730 or 630 BC, or to the time of Alexander the Great. It may also, that 70 years may mirror Judah's captivity, mentioned in Jeremiah 29:10. And it also could be symbolic. So we're not exactly sure what that 70 years mean. Maybe it's just a lifespan. Then the song of the harlot. Now, one of the things that harlots did was they would sing to draw attention to themselves. So if you're a worn out prostitute, you would definitely do that to try to get attention from former clientele who now doesn't see you as nearly as attractive as you used to be. And of course, after Tyre was besieged, she wouldn't have the same, let's just say, attractiveness to her. She would be devastated one time. She would lose her power. She would lose her influence. And she'd have to do whatever she could to get attention, hence the playing of the harp. But then notice verse 17. It says this, that the Lord will visit Tyre, meaning that the city would return at some point. Now that's interesting. Even though they're going to face judgment, like Israel returned, Tyre would be able to return. And notice why. I think there's a clue in verse 18. Her gain, meaning this, what she would regain, the little that she did, that would also be used to help Judah. So with God's help, she would earn money again, and even her sinful earnings would support Judah and her colonies at some point. Now, let me go off of that for just a minute. Now, here's a question. When you look at this, how does it make you feel knowing that God is in control of what's going on in the 21st century? How does that make you feel? Do you ever get frustrated with the political situation in the United States and all that's happening? Anybody?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. Now, it is okay I believe it's okay to feel that way, to feel frustration, as long as those feelings turn you toward spiritual productivity, like prayer, like reaching out, like going after your want. I mean, don't waste your feelings. I mean, there are times this week I would get angry at some of the things I was watching, and it was a reminder to pray, and it was a reminder to take seriously what's going on around you, but not dip down to the level of some of the things that we're watching on television with the destruction and intimidation, and then arrest and other things. I mean, there are things that are going on in our country that are so sad. There's one billionaire, for example, that he's literally funding the district attorneys in their races, and they're corrupt district attorneys. And once they get in there, they let all these looters and stuff like that off scot-free. And then they'll put in prison other people who are righteous. And you think, wow, that's so unjust. Why does God allow that? There's another billionaire that's funding people getting out of jail. It's called a bail project. And they're getting people out as soon as they get put in. All right, and that's frustrating to hear, isn't it? Why would you put criminals back on the street? One guy got out, killed his wife. And, there's all kinds of things that take place. And so when the wheels of justice turn slowly, what does that make you want to do?
Take it into your own hands.
Say again?
Take it into your own hands.
Yep. You do want to take it into your, I do anyway.
Mhm.
And yet, when I look at the Sunday school lesson today, I'm like, God is sovereign.
He is sovereign. Mhm.
Yeah. And there's a day coming, I'm going to mention this tomorrow in the message, that everybody will stand before the Lord. That's going to be a sober day. And
Absolutely.
individuals will stand. Nations will be judged. So here's a question. Why should we trust the Lord with earthly justice? Why should we do that?
Well, doesn't it say in scripture that we are not to judge others, for God will be judging us at the end of times? And then on top of that, God has divine justice. So what he says is the ultimate say in everything, because he can see, he is omnipotent, he is omniscient, he knows everything that's going on. So just because someone can say, oh, well, I'm not guilty because, they'll give some excuse. God doesn't see what they did physically. He looks at their heart, at the reason why they did something. Like, oh, why did you lie? Well, I was trying to not hurt their feelings, where in fact they were just trying not to, they were trying to avoid conflict, which would, either come across their faith or whatever the case is. And so, we may lie to get out of situations, or, but God would look at our heart and say, your reason behind why you did what you did is not, you can justify it, but it's still not right.
Good points.
Pastor Jimmy.
No, go ahead.
All
Go
right,
on.
Jeanette, you're first. Ladies first, Jeanette.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, in looking at all this going on and just thinking about what you just said, I also see that God is showing us that the whole system is corrupt from the top down, and from the bottom up. It started with the family, and it moved into an extended family. It moved into cities. It moved into countries. The whole thing is all messed up. And so there's nothing that a human being can do to straighten it out. But I love the key doctrine. And when it says God is his father, he reigns and he provides care over his whole universe. He loves his creatures and the flow of stream of human history. And he's bringing this to let the whole world, the whole system, all the way down to the animal kingdom where their natures have changed. And it's only through God and his grace that he's going to fix it. So as a Christian, even though we see all the injustices, we're secure in Christ. And we know that the end of the book is true. And that's where our hope lies, in him, and not in our own abilities, or not in politics, or not in countries. But we pray for them, that they'll come to Christ by faith. I pray for those that perpetrated injustices, because my heart was dark, and he changed my heart. And if he changed my heart, he can change others who come to him by faith, he can change their hearts. One human being at a time.
Good word. Johnny?
Yeah, Jeanette, that was terrific. It reminds me of the saying, you can fool some of the people some of the time, and so on. But, I think that all of us can be fooled at one point or another. There's only one that can never be fooled, and that's God. God can never be fooled. God knows the hearts of those that do injustices in this world, not just in our country, but in this world. And there'll come a time, like in Revelations chapter, what is it, 20, where their comeuppance, they'll get their comeuppance. And I know it's difficult for us to sit and watch it all happen, but still yet, it's gonna they're gonna get that. And if we can be fooled, well, it's difficult for us to sit and try to judge somebody in that we don't know all there is to know about situations. No matter what position you take in the world today, or in our country today, we don't know all that's taking place, but God does. That's why we have to trust him.
All right. I want to show you one more picture I put together, because I was trying to think, I was thinking through, what y'all just got through saying, trusting God with justice issues. And a lot of times it's just as simple, just to try to maintain it, is asking who is involved. And some of the comments many of you just said, hey, it's God. Ultimately, God is the one. And why? Is because only he sees justice as it really is. And it is based in who he is, his very nature. Well, what is going on? When is it taking place? And when will justice come? Where will it take place? Why is God doing this? And why is he allowing it? Why is he so patient with certain things? And how is he going to bring it to pass? Well, we just got through hearing Johnny mention that there's a time coming at the end of time when it's all going to play out. But in the meantime, when we can't answer all those questions to our satisfaction, this is the time to say, all right, God, where I can't answer the questions, I will trust in you. I mean, maybe there's more effort and energy that I can put in to answer some of those questions. And maybe I should. Other times, maybe I shouldn't. But ultimately, I'm never going to get any one of those questions answered to my personal satisfaction. And at that point, God, I will trust in you, because I already know what the outcome's going to be. So there's going to be my hope. All right. Any last word?
Jimmy?
Yes.
I think you can answer that graphic that you just put up, the who, what, why, when, where, and how of justice, by the name of the Lord that is used in verse 9.
Okay.
The host has planned it. And that's also translated the Lord of heaven's armies. And it's not just that he will be just, but he has the power to make it happen. Mm-hmm. We see in our society today, there are levels of justice and levels of government, but we see their power failing. But God's power will never fail. This is one of my favorite names of God, Lord of heaven's armies, because I can just picture the Lord sitting on his throne and all the armies that he has just, okay, it's time to go, take care of it. This is what I prophesied, this is what I planned. Just like he said, he planned it for Tyre, and it happened. we see that it happened when we know history. And can you count on a God today that could do what he did back before Christ? And now knowing that Christ has come, can you count on him for the future? Can you count on him for today? And that gives me great strength and courage and hope to know that the Lord of Heaven's armies has already got eternity planned. My today, my tomorrow, my eternity. And that he is just and he has the power to make that justice stand.
All right. Any other final word from somebody?
Just one thing. I wrote this down. Oh, go ahead, Sarah Jane. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I remember my mother when she read Chuck Colson's Born Again book, and then I got it and read most of it. But it was amazing then how he pointed out about the injustice in our court system, especially to do with racial discrimination. And it brought to mind, we have the Christian body has the prison ministry, and yet it reaches the lost in the prisons, and they come out when they're released and they share the gospel. And this Alice has been quite such an spokesman that has been released from prison, and the Black woman is just amazing with her testimony of faith. And it's been a very personal thing for me to enjoy her. And if anybody gets a chance to study her story, because it shows you how it's awakened me so much more about there's so much more prejudice in America than I would like to confess or admit works. And Billy Graham is prayer marching today. Franklin, not Billy Graham, but Franklin Graham is leading his march today.
If Billy's back, I'd sure like to know that.
Well, it's resurrection. It's the third day. Artie had looked up something on the map too.
Well, it's Jeanette's turn.
Okay.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, my confidence is in these words where God said, I am God and there's no other. He has declared the end of all things from the beginning. His counsel will stand and he will do all his pleasures. Now, if God said that, we can rest.
Amen.
What I was going to, Debbie had asked where Tyre was, and I looked at the map of Lebanon. It is in southern Lebanon. Then as you go north, you come across Sidon, which is mentioned often, Tyre and Sidon together in the Bible. And a little bit north of that is Beirut along the coast. And then here's something for Johnny. Tripoli is in Lebanon. If you didn't know where Tripoli was, if you could sing like a Marine, you should know about Tripoli. Now, I zoomed in on the causeway that you were talking about there in Tyre. And all the restaurants and things pop up, and there is a Starbucks right there. We can go get a coffee in Tyre if we wish on the causeway.
That's your food. Is it Lebanon?
Yeah, I said that.
What did you tell her?
It's been there a while, hasn't it?
Well, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, honestly, if you do get a chance, you can go to any search engine and just punch in Tyre and see pictures and aerial shots. It's fascinating to look at. All right. Last word from anybody? All right, let me do this real fast. Because whoever's watching, I want to thank you for being here. If you're not regularly part of Grace Baptist Church, we do hold services tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the building itself. We've been doing this for a while. Or else you can go to gracebaptistarlington.com and there's a live Facebook broadcast, or later on our YouTube. And you can catch recordings of both today's Sunday school and also a recording of Sunday's service. So I hope that if you will join us either live or by Memorex or whatever it is. But thank you for being with us. And we're going to now we close off the session and we'll move into our group prayer time. So Angela, go ahead and close us off. Or do I need to do that?